recently I was for Leon networking.
Hey, sorry, I was trying to set up a Zoom link and record. Okay. Yeah. So I'll start with a couple of questions, and then we'll kind of open up the audience for most questions. If you have a shooting question, just raise your hand, and I don't like really to ask my questions. But I'll start off with one. This morning we've had like a lot of debate on how many satellites will we have in 5 years? Like Dan asked that question.
You're not on Zoom yet.
Okay. Yeah. So I asked, so Dan asked that question or like how many satellites will we have in 5 years? And the post case was that we'll have over 100,000 satellites. The real case was that we'll end up with only like 10,000 satellites or so. So let's talk about the positive side first. What are you most excited about in that vision of the future when in 5 years we have 100,000 satellites? What's the most exciting opportunity that these 100,000 satellites present to you?
You're looking at me, so I guess I'll start.
So, yeah, anything can start. Yeah.
I mean, and to me, the promise of this, right, is that we do get that ubiquitous connectivity for everyone. If you look at the world, right, there's still about 2.6 billion people. About a third of the world does not have connectivity that's affordable, reliable, or resilient in some way. So the best case for me would be that, as I said this morning, if we can accept the trade-offs, if things work out in that way, or we find ways to mitigate the worst aspects of those, if we can get to that point, we have a space where we can truly, connect the third of the world that's not here, because not only are they not able to participate in the opportunities that we all have, but we are also missing out on their creativity and their ideas and their pieces around that. So the best case to me would be that we figure out how to navigate all the different minefields we have to go through to get there, but we get to a point where we can truly bring people on around the world.
So I would say that it will be basically, if you actually have these 100,000 satellites, it will actually bring equity of access to resources to everyone. Like the reason I am successful is because I had access to great educational resources, and I feel like once you make it more and more accessible through the internet and other ways, I feel the disparity in the terms of opportunity will reduce, and hopefully then the best talents that exist in the world can come together and build something great.
Yeah, my take is like this is not only just like communication, let's say either broadband internet or like a direct to phone or maybe like a space IoT. With these many satellites, they can also do sensing as well. They can look down to the earth, like disaster recovery, whatever you do that with the sensing. And also they can look up to the sky in a sense like but right now we have a lot of like ground astronomy out there. But of course, like these people like they're complaining there's so many satellites moving around. But if you can moving that like a telescope to those satellites, they actually can provide a better observation for the deep space as well. And the third point is like it's not only just like a communication, sensing, but also communication. There's already company like that proposed to put data centers into the space. So you got like a solar panel data with almost 100% like utilization. And then like you have a huge amount of data generated by the astronomy and those things. You can do the processing right away. I think this essentially opens a new dimension to computing, sensing, and also communication.
I think on one hand, I see there's a huge amount of excitement about putting out satellites in space. In my view, I think I'm not so excited about the prospect of 100,000 satellites in space. I would rather like to see more focus on interworking what is now a highly fragmented system. I think that is a big concern. I think this also this is to do with the different use cases. People are looking at the incentives to put out the satellite structure. So overall, to me,
there is a lot of momentum, excitement in this space, but this needs to be carefully managed.
To be clear, he was asking for that positive.
Yeah.
Big case. I think there's a lot to go through to
Yeah,
get
so
there.
his next question.
Yeah, that's good.
Then if I have it.
Yeah, that's actually quite useful. I had like a different question, like follow-up question on this one, before we move on to the beer case. So what are the technological challenges that you see emerging in this vision of like 100,000 satellites? And when I say like technological challenges, I mean, as a graduate student, like what can I write a PhD thesis about? So I'm not talking about a paper, but a thesis. Like if I want to write a thesis on satellite networking, my thesis was wrapped up in 5 years. I want to be relevant then. What do I write my thesis about?
Oh, I can answer
Right, go ahead.
that because I'm looking for a PhD student in satellite comes. So I have always had this vision of like beamforming energy downlink. So if you can actually develop algorithms for capturing energy in space, sending 3 satellites up there using rideshare, that's showing even a tiny bit that hey, you can extract energy from sun and beamform it downlink. Even if you demonstrate that, I feel it's an amazing PhD, but the long-term vision is like, hey, let's make these satellites as energy consumers, which then beamform energy to prioritize locations. Hopefully not overheating anything, but just like powering up things that are important to us.
I think that, a couple of papers we talked about today, the general purpose idea would be beautiful. We get to some kind of thing like that allowed us to have, just like we have a terrestrial based general purpose internet that then allows people to work in different ways across the top of that. I think there's a whole host of economic, social, political reasons why we may not get there, but that would be wonderful. Another thing, though, I think an interesting technology aspect is right now, all of this communication between the user terminals and the satellites, from the satellites to the ground stations, is all typically done by radio in some form. But you are seeing people look at optical communication to the ground stations. And so then you have a different aspect because you're not using the same radio frequencies, you're using optical connections, and you're getting higher bandwidth. I was thinking earlier, the person who was talking about clouds, that may interfere with those optical, but what will be the capabilities of optical connections from the LEO satellites down to ground stations? How much higher throughput can we get from those? What kind of lower latency? I don't know, but that's a good research question because I know some people are experimenting with that.
Lots of that.
Yeah, I think for students, let's say, I would tell them like just follow the money. And if you look around to see, let's say, Starlink invest about like 10 billion, and Kuiper promised 10 billion as well. And then most recently, Canadian government inject like the $2.4 billion into Telesat. And the Telesat they're going to create like 1,000 new jobs in Canada and other places. So you can see like there's so many new jobs coming up. And if I'm a student, I'm concerning like pick up my thesis topic. I want to ask myself like if I need to get a job in 3 to 5 years, what should I do? And with this much investment there, I think there's no chance.
So I think in terms of a topic for a PhD student, something along the lines of unifying the access across different constellations and doing this in a sustainable way, I think provides a lot of opportunities from the architecture, interfaces, and variety of aspects come under the bigger umbrella. So probably it's a topic of many PhD theses, not just.
So that's the point.
Well, just following up on JP's comment about follow the money, the other place there's money is the geostationary providers and others who are trying not to hemorrhage money, which they are right now, and customers, but they're looking at how do they go and do multi-orbit kind of communications. Telesat, Viasat just announced they want to do a big connection with Telesat to try to use their LEOs with the Viasat GEOs. Eutelsat bought OneWeb in part to look at this. All of this multi-orbit stuff is theory right now. It's not actually there, but there are people looking at that and doing that. And I think that's an interesting aspect. You look at SES, who's got a large chunk of satellites in medium Earth orbit. They're talking to various people, a lot of them talking to the geo providers about how can they do something to do theirs, because both of them are losing customers to the LEOs and all of that. So who are again, follow the money, and where is that money, and how are those folks are trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding and come up with something that keeps us relevant. So
I guess the other aspect of my original question was the bear case. That essentially, what are you concerned about in the future of satellites? Like, what would or should prevent us from having 100,000 satellites in 5 years? So it can either be a technical challenge.
So I can start because in that graph you saw, I was the only one who mentioned that it will be 20,000 or less. And the reason
Now we
being,
know.
and the reason being that I feel like there's not much incentive to send more satellites for Starlink, especially because the consumer base will not increase by that much, I believe. I feel the application they're looking at, they're semi-profitable right now and they will become profitable in some time. And to really run this kind of deployment plan, and all these companies say these things, but are they willing to put money where their mouth is, right? And it's tough to estimate. Kuiper has been saying, oh, we'll launch a satellite for 10 times in the last 5 years. They've launched 0 satellites. So it's tough for me to trust when they're paid to carry the words over the last.
I think I also think that.
Go ahead.
So in terms of the use cases at the moment, I look at the seeming quite niche use cases, which will come in the way of significant number of satellites totally. And from a purely economic point of view, this would not make sense in the long run. There is also issue of regulation, satellite debris, and all these issues which also stop this at some point in the pace of this. And some of these are also run by people, companies which are very fragile. So this could play part as well. So all of these would mean the primary thing I would think from a technical point of view and an economic point of view would be on use cases. At the moment, the use cases, there is no single killer use case that would justify putting 100,000 satellites in space.
So then people find.
oh, I think it'll be way more than 20,000 because we're already at about 9 or 10 right now today. And I think that in the new Trump administration, Elon Musk will be unfettered and will be allowed to do whatever he wants to do. And so I think, he's applied for, as I said this morning, with the SEC to go to the full 30,000 of his Gen 2 shell. I'm sure he'll do it because, he's got the capacity, he's going to go and do it. And I think for a similar reason, Jeff Bezos has poured so much money into Kuiper and into everything else at this point. And he just can't get rockets to launch, but he's got Blue Origin, which in theory is supposed to launch this year. They're running out of time, but they're supposed to launch this year in their first launch. And then they've signed up to do a whole bunch. They're doing 20 of these AST mobile launches over the next while, in theory, and more of this. So I think just the competitive economic pressure of those two, you're going to see Kuiper put up, and they have a timeline. They're up against. It's by 2026, they have to have 50% of their 3,000 satellites up there. So they're going to go and do that. And then you've got China, who is deeply concerned about Western dominance of the LEO. And so they're going to launch, they've launched 30 satellites in their first one, but I'm sure they'll go for that. So I think we're well into the tens of thousands.
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that companies are racing to launch satellites and countries are racing to launch satellites, but there's not a strong business case for them. I guess Japan has.
But look, Starlink has 4 million customers that are paying it right now. Last report was they are cash positive in their economics of that. So and they're signing up people more and more. In the whole southeastern part of the United States got a really good lesson in the value of Starlink. And I'm sure they got a good pool of customers out of that region. And you're seeing that in lots of other places. So, you know, now I do not think there's room for all of these companies to succeed economically. But I think some of it will, certainly.
Yeah, I think my nightmare is like more like a geopolitics in a sense, like enough now. If we look at the like navigation systems, we have at least four. Like, yes, Beidou, Galileo, and also Russian. Of course, they only have like about 100 satellites involved in that range.
Right.
But if we talk about the LEO communication satellite, if we're gonna repeat the same like four major systems, each of them have like maybe 100,000. Then like we're gonna add up very quickly to a million, even higher as well. So the trouble here is like how to coordinate these many satellites, not only for communication, but also for collision avoidance. They're gonna run into the problem sooner than later because this is just by probability. And with the law of large numbers, this is gonna happen guaranteed.
Yeah.
So then we're gonna get into the nightmare because like so there's cascading effect in the like low Earth orbit. Then the entire outer space will become unusable for a while. So I guess like it's the same thing as like why we need IETF, why we need like the Internet Society and other organizations is coordination. But right now there's not much coordination because there's only one bigger player and many small players at this moment. Maybe these small players become bigger later as well. But I think at the very beginning, one thing I try to convey to my friends here at SpaceX is like you guys are the leader right now. You should be also like somehow have to put a certain of like self-regulation there because otherwise like Starlink does its own way, OneWeb does its own way because they're now in different satellite orbit. They're not much collision there. But once like you have all these satellites like close enough, and they're also close enough to the International Space Station, China Space Station. There's going to be length involved there as well. So might someone give them that one.
There is though this whole new opportunity for new business models. You look at some of these companies, these startups that are going up there to do debris collection.
Yeah, the clean the
Basically,
space.
Garbage men of space to go up and get rid of debris and old satellites.
With the management.
But to that point, right? Like we all know like all about recycling, or we should all be sustainable, right? Most of the recycled plastic ends up in some country in a dump, and we all feel like, oh, we did something great today. But and it's going to be the same about debris as well, right? Like there's no financial incentive. Government is probably not going to pick up the buck, and it's not going to be as financially sustainable as you made it out to be. I feel that, yeah. I just feel like
There are people who are doing this. Whether there's a model, whether they can get governments to fund it, I don't know.
Yeah.
But there are people looking to do that.
Okay, so sorry, Miri has something to add.
Yeah, I also wanted to add one thing, and this is like my long-term fear, like not like 5 years, not even 1,000 years, like 10,000 years, right? I feel like if you're launching satellites, right, when they burn down in the atmosphere, all the precious metals in these satellites are getting distributed across the Earth, okay? If you do it to like a significant portion of precious metals on Earth, right? The ores are only valuable to extract because they are extremely dense ores. And once you're geo-distributed, right, you can't recover it at a reasonable cost. So the cost of those precious metals is also going to skyrocket when you scale it across like millennia. Of course, not in 10, 15 years, but that's something to worry about.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
yeah, my greatest worry is that too. What are we doing to the upper atmosphere? We don't know. And we think about for the longest time, people just threw stuff in the ocean because the ocean was big and it would absorb it all. And now we're learning that later. You know, asbestos was a miracle fabric for so many of us at a certain time until we discovered it was poisoning everybody. You know, I do worry about that we don't have enough foresight into what we're doing when we have to dispose of it all. But I don't know how we get that data. It may just be yet another thing we discover later that maybe we shouldn't have been doing this.
So I have a couple more questions, but I see like some audience members already like raising their hand. So let's go to the audience questions. So you heard the first one.
You said you think that big corporations like SpaceX should take responsibility as being in the forefront of regulate this to solve our community. But do you actually think that any interest in this? So they would give a competitive advantage.
Yeah, currently they don't. But this happened like to IBM as well. You see, the IBM has the domination in mainframe machine. And then we have mini computer, and then we have personal computer. And at a certain point, IBM is like enough. It's not a worthwhile for me to like do personal computer myself, but instead like I'm getting into something but IBM compatible personal computer. And then we have the new generation of all different kind of computers out there. So I would think like at a certain point of time, like starting we're gonna realize this issue as well, because again, like there's certain limit how many customers they can sign up. And at a certain reach time, there's no much growth anymore. They need to open new market in China. They need to open new market maybe in Russia, and other places as well. They don't have landing rights. They have to get into this roaming business. So when they come to roaming, you need to have a standard, because like you're not talking to the same tower as your own tower. You like your own satellite. So this may happen in the next 5 years, I believe.
It also may be that we get an event, solar storms or something. There may be some kind of event that happens that causes the satellite operators to realize that, maybe we do need to build better resilience in space-based networks. And so therefore, maybe it's better for us to be talking and figuring out ways to work with it. But outside of improved competition or some kind of event like that, I don't see it happening for a while either. The market's too immature in that regard.
I think in general, markets alone do not have incentives to self-regulate. I think there has to be a healthy balance of regulation and incentives for the market. So at the moment, this is in one extreme. Actually, if you compare with the terrestrial cellular networks, new entrants find it hard to get in, and that's the reason why there's a lot of push to stimulate that. But in the video networking space, it is quite opposite. So anyone can get in so long as they have the capital, and it's highly unregulated. So I don't see any incentive for naturally self-regulating. This goes against the profit motive.
But I just want to add, like self-regulation in general, historically has been worse than no regulation. I feel like either it should be regulated by the power of the people through some democratic organization or through some standardization body, or let's not have a mirage of regulation, because we have seen in many other consumer-facing industries where self-regulation has failed. And frankly, like if you see spectrum usage in US, the reason cellular, Wi-Fi, all of these amazing technologies we have built works is because it's regulated by a central authority, which is people powered, right? FCC. If it's self-regulated, then we have seen what happens. There are doors flying off airplanes, right? So I would prefer it to be a centrally regulated system through either internationally or nationally. That is geopolitical. Or let there be no regulation. Let's just do things and fail, and then not have the mirage of it.
That is honest, Eric.
Yeah, I also want to dig into the subject, let's say. I have a certain fear, to be honest. Once the big operator here achieves a critical mass of customers, that they are looking for more topics to gain more profit out of the system. Once this big fear I have to look at things, for example, that we will get some less neutrality issues. So like you have warranty of service for some special providers that offer your service that play to Starlings, but then its service get priority. What do you think about that? Do you think that could happen, that we get into that issue, or do we have any way to maintain the net neutrality as well?
I can tell you an example. In India, there was a Net Neutrality Act that happened, and that basically said like a provider can't provide a service which is just kind of not neutral towards other services. And probably there is an opportunity even in US for a legislative-based solution, which would be more power of the people, which is how things should be.
I'm gonna disagree in terms of in the US, there won't be that.
Yeah.
And at least, yeah, certainly not for the next 4 years.
Yeah, no.
And,
Will it happen? That is a different question.
yeah. But this is one of the reasons why at the internet side, we started looking at this back in 2021 and 22, the kind of thing was because we're concerned. If you consolidate all of the space-based internet into a couple of different services that happen to be provided by for-profit entities, controlled by billionaires, et cetera, whatever, do you get into a situation? And we very well could, because you're right, at some point, if you're running out of customers, or if you need new markets to expand more pieces and more stuff because you want to finance, going to Mars, whatever, you need to go and get more. So why not have somebody pay you to go and make it so that their content gets to people faster and or block other people's content? And somebody's in that position can do that. And especially if they're global, who's going to come after them? Nobody.
We kind of already had this issue. We saw on a presentation about the gateway applications. So when you put your gateway application, of course you prefer some endpoints which is better connected than others.
Right, but I think to your point, this is the worry, which is why I think on a global level, if we want space-based, LEO-based internet access, we've got to get that competition. And which, well, unfortunately, at this point comes back to somebody's got to get launch capacity working, more than just SpaceX. And so we've got to get Arianespace, ULA, Blue Origin, somebody else has got to start launching rockets into LEO to provide some other alternative of getting those rockets up there. Or else, satellites up there, or else we're just going to be in this situation like we are. But until we get to a competitive space where we've got more than just Starlink, we run that risk.
Yeah, I agree. Like for the competition, we needed to somehow make it more level ground for other 2 or 3 more players. Otherwise, just tear toward one bigger player.
Yeah, and again, that goes back to Mahesh's point about these kind of multi-party shared kind of constellations, which would be easier to launch and maintain, but require some standardization and interfaces, architectures and protocols.
Yeah, I think indeed.
So go ahead.
I just want to follow up on that. So at the moment, when I look at Starlink and other networks, this is pretty much a private network in the sky that it has a rules. If you look at private vans of the cloud service providers, it's no different, except that the access is already there. And these are imperceptible for the internet access or accessing cloud services. Whereas in the case of Starlink and other services, this is very much spanning the access as well as the core. And I think that's where standards-based approach is hard to retrofit on what already exists. So it is more going in the direction of what's happening in the private WAN space. And we just need to keep that into account when we think about multiple players participate.
So I take credit from this side. So one more thing about simulation in the ITF, there's now deep space. They talk about communication to further optimize. So establishing internet to the past, essentially. And one of the problems behind that is abundance of information, ISP France. And Orange in France has their own Starlink competitor, Starlink. So my question is, why do you think that I understand why Starlink can, by the way, is never why are the smaller players, some smaller players trying to push for simplification? My hand, like people like Orange or anybody the idea of talking about units at all, right? Like the charter for the deep space specifically excludes new units, which I think makes a lot of sense, but like why nobody talking about it?
Well, deep space. So deep space is what it's to your point. It's looking at how do you do IP-based communication when you're going out to the moon and Mars and beyond, and really looking at that outward side rather than, all of this is looking at how do we provide access to Earth.
Yeah.
So it's a Earth-facing rather than outside-facing aspect of that. I think part of the lack of standardization is on one level, IP works, right? You go over a Starlink connection or a OneWeb connection, and it's just IP. All of the standards of the ITF, everything that we do, it all works, whether it's whatever, quick or TCP or pick your thing. So that part of the stack all works. It's the parts down underneath that go to the Starlink Mini, it's the parts that interact with the user terminal. It's the pieces that are there. Those are the parts that are not standardized. And there's nobody, I think the economic incentives aren't there to standardize those yet. There are people looking at how you do an IXP, an internet exchange point in space. So that you could be able to have a OneWeb network and a Starlink network and a Kuiper network, exchanging traffic or something like that. But again, until you've got more networks up there, there's no incentive or no basis to try to do that beyond theory.
I think it goes back to the incentives in terms of use cases. So at the moment, at global scale, the primary use case that one could talk about is universal connectivity. And that alone doesn't offer incentives for alternative infrastructures beyond what's being backed by the stuff in space.
Yeah, besides ITF, like 3GPP is looking to this like other than NTF. Alright. That's kind of the US.
I think there was a.
Yeah, so there's like 3 questions now. Abdul Bahi, Om, and then your. So did you read your question already?
Yeah.
Answer?
Okay,
Okay.
my concern, just a question, sorry, is, you tell me, and a lot of things have to be, I understand that's what's quite priority. And I still believe that there's really a need for strong, black oversight of the whole system. But who will be in charge of that when we don't even fully understand technology? How would someone provide oversight?
Who will be in charge of what?
So standardization or policing them, anything that, right? The technology is pretty new, right? And did everyone give a reason for why he's doing something, to make it better efficient? So, and standardization, as I know, is good, but it slows this down, because then it's a lot of probability to put a lot of this into perspective. So who should, because Stanley could not something.
So part of this goes back to the outer space treaties. And the basic answer is there isn't anyone. Right, because the ITU-R specifies the spectrum and the communication that goes for the communication up and down for this. And they are also responsible for the slots, the orbital slots for the geosynchronous satellites. So that's regulated through the ITU-R. But they specifically do not regulate anything with satellites in orbital shells or anything in LEOs. That's outside the remit of the ITU-R. And that's the only part of the ITU that does anything with space-based pieces. So there isn't anybody right now doing this. You go to your, you go to your local regulator and you say, I want to file for this many satellites in these orbital shells communicating at these frequencies. And that regulator, the FCC in the United States or in other countries, whatever, they then file those things with the ITU and say, hey, we've received this from this. And there's this vague kind of, correlation between them to make sure that people aren't all coming in at the same orbital shells. But it's happening at that national level, which is why you saw that thing around the 337,000 out of eSpace. That was a filing out of Rwanda because they knew the government regulator there, and they filed the thing there, which then bubbled up to the ITU. But there's no coordination in any of this. Largely, I think, because our mechanisms for government communication and collaboration never envisioned that there would be thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of satellites. We had this nice thing, 1,800 orbital slots in geosynchronous. That was it. So at the moment, there's nobody.
So I'm going to move away from standardization talk for a bit because we talked about that quite a lot. I'm hoping Om has a different question.
Great. Awesome. Based on the earlier you mentioned the use case of saying Southeast right now, where like the hurricanes happen, I'm kind of curious what you think about that was kind of specific, like disaster-based use cases. What are the technical problems there? How do you think that will evolve for something?
Disaster-based is awesome. It's amazing. I mean, it just the ability to go and drive a trailer down to North Carolina, sit there, power it, like the ITDRC trailers I was mentioning, they're completely solar powered. You can drive to the middle of nothing. You go and you set that up. You got Starlink connectivity, you got Wi-Fi and cell service for everything. It is a complete game changer. The same folks are out in Western the United States with wildfires. You can take a pickup truck, all right, with a generator, with some batteries and whatever, go drive that out into the middle of whatever. And suddenly you've got connectivity that you can go and supply to everybody who's there. And, and we're seeing it on islands with subsea cable cuts. We're seeing it in other different places, storms. I mean, it's truly a game changer in terms of disaster response.
So I'm going to expand on one question for the
That's
rest of the
not a question. And this, oh, so sorry. For Florida, it's not phone to satellite straight. You have to have a device.
You have
Today,
Oh, okay.
to Wi-Fi.
today,
I was thinking it's like a mobile phone directly to the satellite, and I was okay.
let's wait 2 years and see how everybody launches.
I think they did have like a version of it also over Florida on
They,
online.
with the text message.
Or the text messages were going directly into phone.
Yeah,
They already did that.
T-Mobile.
Hey, but I'm going to expand on Tom's question a little for the rest of the panelists. I think we talked about use cases and we talked about technical challenges before. So is disaster-based, like disaster networking or like networking for disaster management, a big enough use case to necessitate like so many satellites? And B, are there technical challenges to be solved in that space for researchers? And is that problem solved with Starlink launching the satellites and like enable direct to cell? Or are there like technological challenges that still remain in that space in terms of protocols, like algorithms, applications, whatnot?
Yeah, but remember that it's always like a backup for the internet backbone, like for many years. But before that, we used geosatellite. Now we use like geosatellite. Before we only like do this at the enterprise level. Now we can also do this at the individual customer level, consumer level. So I guess like this just the scalability change in terms like the disaster recovery. It has been there because whenever you have a wire, it's always better than wireless. Whenever you have a ground network, it's always better than like a space-based one. But the problem is like enough when you have disasters, you may temporarily have this like a wire up, or maybe have like the ground network available. So from that perspective, I think like nowadays even many companies like that do this as well. Like they purchase a Starlink Enterprise like that plan. They have like the first 100 gigabyte of the data is priority data, and the other one is unlimited like the standard data because Starlink knows like those companies they don't need to use the data in the normal days anyway. So they gave them like 100 gigabyte of the priority data, but it has a very high fee. So this is a very good indication.
So Mahesh and Akshay, like you mentioned that you would like to have less than 20,000, or you think you would have less than 20,000 satellites. Do you think this use case of disaster management is big enough that you would like raise that number up?
Not really. I feel like if you just want coverage, you would have coverage, right? And surely you can like prioritize links from that location in the mesh network or backhaul network. So I don't think it's the infrastructure in the sky that's the limit. I think it's basically, okay, you have these Starlink terminals which can be accessed through pickup trucks and other approaches. But you literally needed a boat to reach it many places in North Carolina. Particularly in Asheville, North Carolina. I really like the mountains there. But the problem there is like, if you can somehow connect this Starlink terminal to a cell tower, you can increase the range of connectivity it provides by several kilometers, right? And let's say just text only, which is like old G scale connectivity. If you can just put like such towers, you can cover like 2 counties, right? And that's the communication you need. You don't really need like a video calling infrastructure for help, providing help, right? You really need a backup infrastructure. Do I mean like, oh, like people will realize like, oh, wired infrastructure is not reliable, they'll move to Starlink? No.
Yeah, Starlink actually doesn't like this with KDDI in Japan.
Yeah. In Japan, they did it. In Java, they did it. There are some tribes in Canada, like different tribes that do this.
Yeah.
So I think as a backhaul, there is a good case to serve multiple use cases, including disaster. So you have pop-up base stations that can be put up with backhaul from Starlink, which is what is being referred to. I think that can go along with other kinds of use cases like moving access networks, like on planes and trains and so forth. You have the backhaul providers. So I think there is an argument to be made about taking a bunch of these use cases together to justify putting up satellites and even if it is a completely closed operator, not standards based. But I'm not sure if this will prompt going from 20,000 to 100,000 type of things.
Just to follow up on his answer, there are papers at Modicom that have shown that, oh, you can put base stations on planes and drones to create like these remote networks. So I just wanted to give a shout out to those papers.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm too cheap, but if from a personal, I work out of a home office. Okay, I have my only provider for internet access is the cable company right now because I don't even get good phone service where I live in Vermont. So I would very much like his mini and a battery backup or something to be able to have for my own resilience when we get storms hitting us and ice storms this winter or something like that. It's not the price point. I'm too cheap to want to go and do that for a standby. But that's like to me, in one way, it's the ideal personal resilience kit is, get that Starlink mini, have it sitting there, when something comes in, I power it off the battery and there I am, I'm back on the net. It's beautiful.
If you had questions, so.
Yeah, so last session, I was wondering, they didn't talk too much about the 5G aspect. It sounded to me like, well, maybe that's just going to take over the whole standardization part. But it's not once you have that to the handset, but that's something you start technology. And the nice thing is that then who cares if it's starting with approach, whatever. It's like you switch your cell phone device or change the SIM card, you can think of the same thing for the satellite providers. And then once you at the moment, it's a matter of balance like this one, but once you have that one, device, then take that as the standard for your satellite, which you high speed connection, that to the phone, obviously, enough the phone. It's just all 5G. To me, that sounded like sort of that makes sense. Just like 5 years in the future, thinking so concern all that, and then so that is lower layers.
At the moment, as I see it, the access is not conducive for standardization. So it's already there. So retrofitting a standard, I think this is more of an afterthought. If you look at what happened in the cellular space and in the internet world, I think it's very different in terms of the order of events. So in that sense, perhaps the AST mobile kind of option where have these passive reflector in the sky giving you wider coverage. I think this probably is more amenable to getting this on the devices and then playing around with 5G, 6G. So that's probably the skeptic in me saying this. So standards, there is a lot of work going on in terms of this NTN. But I don't know how that aligns with the incentives of the likes of Starlink and others to conform to those standards.
Yeah, I think the space roaming is one key application because remember, in older days, we have to bring different phones to different countries because they use different systems. But after GSM, we have a common, let's say, not a standard, but a roaming agreement in a sense like now, you go to another country, you may purchase a new SIM card. That's all. You use it on your own phone, or you can go to the other country and use your existing phone because your operator, your home country has a roaming agreement with the other service provider. This is something I hope can happen in the space as well, because again, either Starlink or someone from OneWeb, they cannot get a landing rights everywhere. And then if you need to serve the customer when they travel around the world, you have to get the roaming agreement in place. If you need a roaming agreement, you need some technical standard between them, how they talk to each other. So this might be the a case to drive sort of harmonization of these different private operators.
unless they just turn the roaming frequencies on because they can, right?
Yeah.
But you're right. I think the direct-to-device changes so much. I mean, but we have to get there. And I think we'll see, Starlink has now been launching satellites, SpaceX has been launching Starlink satellites with the direct-to-device radios for a period of months now. I don't know exactly how many they have up there, but I know, they keep doing it, part of every.
About 200.
Is it about 200 now? Okay, so they're getting there. So it'll be interesting to see what they do when they turn it on, because you're right, at that point, the access between this and the satellite is a solved problem, because these have built-in, radios and protocols and everything else inside of this. And so if Starlink is using those same frequencies to communicate with us, you're solving that side of the equation. Now, what it does when it gets to the satellite is another question, because we don't know, and I don't know how Starlink is going to implement that. Will it be that it bounces it back down to a ground station? Will it be that it brings them across the network? I
They
don't know.
use the mobile networks like operators like infrastructure, in a sense, like in US, they use like T-Mobile, in Canada with Rogers.
Right.
So in a sense, like once you get to the satellite, they only go to their one station and then get into like a T-Mobile or like a Rogers.
So is it just reflecting it back down?
Yeah.
Almost like that.
Like that? Okay.
So, just to give a perspective, like, I feel like earlier than 100,000 satellites, we are going to get a SIM card in our unified receiver, which can connect to multiple satellite constellations. I think that is going to happen earlier than getting 100,000 satellites. And I think you brought up a great point, like, hey, these SIM cards are going to become basically like a universal SIM, which is also for cellular, also for satellite, and different frequencies and all of that. And FCC will need to rein in some of these things, but it is doable. Of course, like for people who love acronyms, I would highly recommend people to read the release 18 of 5G PPP, because it has in detail some really cool ideas in like how do you have synchronous communication despite having heavy Doppler. There's like a lot of cool science in this.
And I would also point out, Apple just dropped a $1.5 billion investment in Globalstar. So they're also investing in who's been the provider of their directed device so far. So, we'll see what they do. And Globalstar has they were one of those early, the 1990s LEOs, like with Iridium and stuff. And so they're looking at their next generation of satellites as well. We haven't even talked about them, but they're another player in space, especially with Apple behind.
So it's 5 minutes. I think Hannah has a question. Did anyone on this side have a question? Because I'm not this Does anyone on this side have a question that I missed? Okay, no. So maybe Hannah has a question. Let's go with that. Which is also doing the direct device.
It's not a big, all this in the last security and emergency. What if the country decides to do solution and it's spy net and device you spy on other information. Depending on
Yeah, and add to that question, which is the reverse side, that hey, if Starlink decides to deny service to a country to the war, like how do you, like what do we do about it? So it goes both ways. That if you launch a satellite that's fine versus like a satellite that's not being used when you want it.
I think the answer to your first question is again, these are proprietary systems. So that Starlink mini dish can only talk to Starlink satellites, and it's using its own proprietary systems or something. So somebody else who launches their own other satellite network is not going to be able to go and, I mean, they could probably see the beams in some way, but they're not necessarily going to be able to decode it. It's probably encrypted in some form, in some way. So you're not. Oh, absolutely. You could do jamming. You could do other stuff. You could throw up something that goes and knocks out a bunch of satellites physically. There's all those concerns that could happen that are there. As far as your question, I don't know what we could do about people turning off, because you go back to the question about consolidation. And if you have one operator, then that operator can choose to deny or open up. But,
The spying satellite is already there. Like that's all the military does every day.
yeah.
So that's not like a new problem. I think in terms like kind of denial of service.
Yeah.
Again, like kind of there's nothing like you can do if you only have one provider. If you have multiple providers, there's a different story, because like you cannot somehow get all these providers to get a service at the same time, because there's incentive for them to provide service if the other one deny. If you deny, I get more business, so I know.
Again, for your question, some form of regulation is proposed, at a global scale. And to what Deepak brought up, I guess so long as this service is provided by an entity and offering a closed system, then this is no different from the internet companies like Google, etc., who choose to provide a service they want to provide. And I think that is how it's a problem.
Yes, we have a last question, I guess. I'm hoping this will be ending on an optimistic note, but I'm leaving it to the audience.
No,
It's not, it's fine. Leave it to the people that are not better than me, technology.
it's basically a follow on that because we are already seeing that we have lots of investments probably in the military sector as well. I see it in in Ukraine, but also I don't know if you know the Urbana-Champaign is one of the main contractors of the Edinburgh. They just started 1.5 billion euros. They have their own installation for secure which is probably remote mechanics or something. But what are the implications then? Because we said resilience is one of the main indicators why we're doing this. But if I send you that, that's basically the key which talks on all this. So if we have different indicators there, and not only use it for poor consumer stuff, this is all about for military, and like countries get involved at a different level, and then something else.
Yeah, Starlink already has something called a Star Shield. Starlink already has something called a Star Shield for military.
It's called, yeah, it's Star Shield. It's their military offering, it said, and they're launching into it. You know, we don't know, but it's a whole bunch of those launches, especially ones out of Edinburgh Air Force Base that are going up there that are, it just says Star Shield or something. You don't know what it is.
I think like in general, most people believe in doing the right thing. And I feel these important big decisions are made by people who are elected by most people, right? And I strongly believe that good leaders will be chosen to take the right stance on these issues. For example,
That's the Canadian government's point of view to invest in LSS.
no, it's like the reason I believe this, like, sure, like at a given point of time, the elected leaders may not necessarily agree with you, but they do represent the thought of majority, and I feel like in general most people are. So the elected leaders, like everyone wants like denuclearization, and those are things that are well accepted now. This would also become something well accepted in once the technology also becomes a little bit more mature. So I believe in people.
That's one of my fears, is that we get to the point where we are so dependent on space-based, you know, all I've said here, space-based internet access, it's a phenomenal way to get connectivity to the people that are not able to. It's also wonderful. I mean, there's so many benefits to it, but the concern is if we become so based on that we then are doing so much through it and we become really dependent on it, and you get a severe storm or solar storm or something like that. But also with the weaponization of this, there were studies that I think the Chinese government, there was some stories that come out there that they were doing, you know, looking at how did you go and take out a substantial number of Starlink satellites. You know, you could see the kind of thing that if Starlink becomes really, you know, used in lots of ways, or if Starlink were to be turned on over China, which SpaceX probably would not do because the Chinese say they don't want it there. But if it were something, you could see that a appropriate response from them may be to go and knock out that. We've seen thoughts around that with the North Koreans, with Russia, with others who would want to go and knock out substantial, deny the communications capability of other parts of the world. And yes, that's a huge risk because, you know, you can send up rockets or missiles with nuke to do an EMP or whatever, and you could wipe out a lot of communications infrastructure that we've all come to rely on. So let's not abandon fiber. Let's not abandon subsea cables. Let's view space-based as another layer in our resilient, reliable models. But yeah, the risk is there.
Just a quick one. Then what if we just invest more in gems? At least,
Invest in jammers. Yeah, I mean,
at least, I don't know, because if government is involved, then that's probably a problem.
what
The Leo is a little bit harder to jam than like the geosatellite. Geosatellite, there's only a fixed location there, very few of them. It's easy to jam them. But with the Leo, like there's thousands of them. It's pretty
So
hard.
it's better to form them.
Yeah, and please say this, and like, last, okay, let me get the last word to Mahesh.
But since Deepak has asked for something positive,
Thank you.
so there are certainly applications like universal connectivity or Earth observation that where there is opportunity for global agreement and treaties, and so long as there is a framework of that, as with any tech, you could use it for good or bad, and that kind of framework is lacking, but I think that should be on the top of the agenda for everyone who's interested in space.
So yeah, so let's take that as a call for better applications and better use cases for Leo to emerge over the next few years. I guess we can conclude the panel at this point. We're already behind time in one of the panelists has to leave. But thanks a lot for serving on the panel. Yeah, and just want to like also conclude the workshop by saying that thanks Dan for being a keynote speaker and traveling for the workshop. Thanks to all of you for being engaged in discussion and the exciting people presentations. And thanks to Mahesh, Jay, and Akshay for serving on the panel. I hope to see you again next year for the next version of UNet somewhere at some place sometime. But till then, goodbye. And I had a lot of fun. Thank you, guys. Yes.
yeah, you should also know Deepak does webinars.
Okay. This is
Picture nothing?
yeah, we could take a picture actually. Let me just do that.
Let's